Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines on the world today. German Chancellor Angela Merkel says if some EU members had had vaccine supplies and others had not, it would have shaken the internal market to its core. Her message comes as European leaders meet via video link to discuss a coordinated path out of the pandemic. Plus, it's 200 years since Greece became independent of the Ottoman Empire following the Greek War of Independence. Again, a warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world, and thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm Amarachi Ubani. We begin with what German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that has got nations thinking. She was addressing German MPs just before the EU summit today when she said that if some members of the EU had had vaccine supplies and others had not, it would have shaken the EU's internal market to its core. But some states led by Austria are calling for the revision of the distribution method after they failed to obtain enough doses earlier this year. Ms. Merkel had warned that the impact of the pandemic would go far beyond this year. She said the EU relied on what vaccines it could make locally because British production sites are manufacturing for Britain and the United States is not exporting. There's more of the situation in other parts of the world in our global update.
The number of people who have died of COVID-19 in Brazil has surpassed 300,000, the world's second highest death toll after the United States. The country is struggling to contain the rapid spread of the virus, which has pushed hospitals close to collapse. Many are running out of ICU beds, and drugs needed to treat critically ill patients are in short supply. Meanwhile, Brazil's neighbors and trading partners are taking steps to limit contact with South America's largest country and contemplating more draconian ones. Peru has announced a new lockdown after health authorities identified a high number of coronavirus cases of the dangerous Brazilian P1 variant in the capital city of Lima. Poland is to shut kindergartens, hair salons and limit church service attendance from Saturday ahead of Easter holidays as it faces the most difficult moment of the pandemic, setting another consecutive daily record of new coronavirus cases. Poland reported a record 34,151 new coronavirus cases over the past 24 hours, with the Prime Minister saying citizens' mobility and business activity needs to be further restricted to stop the rapid spread of the virus. Drug giant AstraZeneca has updated its data on how well its coronavirus vaccine works, saying the vaccine showed 76% efficacy instead of the 79% earlier reported against symptomatic coronavirus disease and 100% efficacy against severe or critical disease or the need for hospitalization. The vaccine is also said to be 85% effective in preventing symptoms in volunteers 65 and older. And finally, Israel has administered 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccine to more than half of its population, a world-beating rollout that has helped the country emerge from the pandemic closures. Distribution of Pfizer Inc. and BioNTech vaccine in Brazil began in December, with eligibility extended to citizens and residents over the age of 16. The country has seen an 85% drop in daily COVID-19 deaths, a 72% decrease in the critically ill, and 86% fewer daily coronavirus cases since the pandemic's third peak in mid-January.
So the awaited meeting of European leaders is holding today, Thursday, in Brussels. And the main thing on the agenda is figuring a coordinated path out of the COVID-19 pandemic as infections surge again in many countries. Many of those countries are seeking agreement on how to ramp up supplies of vaccines after a feeble start to inoculation. Europe's painfully slow rollout has led to a quarrel with Britain, which has imported at least 11 million doses made in the EU. Britain says it did a better job negotiating with manufacturers and arranging supply chains. The EU says it should share more. Well, the meeting is underway in Brussels, and we understand the Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz has called for the EU to counter-steer massive imbalance of vaccine availability. He said to leaders just a while ago that the European Union so far exported more than 70 million vaccine doses to all parts of the world, yet it has not received a single dose from other parts of the world. He calls it an imbalance and that he supports the EU Commission President, Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, if her goal is to counter-steer and prevent Europe from exporting while at the same time falling back when it comes to vaccinating its citizens. So the main thing, as we have said at the EU summit today, is discussing a coordinated path out of the pandemic. Infections are surging in many countries in Europe. Just ahead of the summit, French President Emmanuel Macron spelled out the frustration over vaccine rollouts that are far behind those of Britain and the United States, acknowledging that European leaders had been too timid at the start. EU executives have unveiled plans to tighten oversight vaccine exports that would allow greater scope to block shipments to countries with higher inoculation rates. London and the EU have been sparring over this issue of vaccines, but both sides released a statement today saying that they're working on specific steps to create a win-win situation and expand vaccine supply for all their citizens.
In short, EU threatened to use its export authorization scheme, and in particular against countries that might be ahead in terms of vaccination rates. And you might just as well even call it's directly aimed at the UK, because it is highly infeasible the EU would block export to Israel, which is the other country that is ahead of Europe. So this is a very targeted measure in order to create a negotiation leverage to reach some kind of a settlement between the UK and the EU by saying, yes, we negotiated poorly or actually late, and in return, we would like to have a little bit more of those dosages and to have a slightly different distribution of the vaccines.
The VOA's Henry Ridgwell is in London for us. Henry, great to see you. What is the general impression about this row between the EU and London over vaccine production and exports?
Well, I think it depends on which side you're on and from which perspective you're looking at. The European Union perspective is that they have exported tens of millions of vaccines, not least to the United Kingdom, and haven't received enough in return, according to the contracts that they've signed with the drug companies like AstraZeneca. And today, the European Union has put out its own figures to try to underline its argument. On Twitter, the Commission wrote that the EU has exported 77 million doses of vaccines to 33 countries since December the 1st, and the UK has received the biggest share, 20 million of those doses. 88 million doses have been delivered to EU member states and 62 million actually administered. So the point they're trying to make is we have exported 20 million doses and they say we have received zero in return from Britain. And so it's time things were evened up because, as we've been discussing, vaccination rates in Britain far exceed those in mainland Europe. If you're here where I am in London, the government's perspective here is that Britain got in early in investing in the development of the vaccines and also in signing those contracts early. So they are first in the queue. They've signed their contracts and those vaccines are being delivered. And it's the EU's fault for being sluggish initially in signing those contracts and in investing the money. That's the explanation for the slower vaccination rate in Europe. Now, both of those things can be true at the same time. It doesn't get us any further forward in the debate, in the argument between Britain and the European Union. And that's what they've got to try to 24 hours. Now, in Europe, they are discussing whether to impose these export controls. As you've been discussing, it will look at whether the vaccination rate in the destination country is much higher than Europe. and whether the company involved, whether it's AstraZeneca or Pfizer, is delivering those vaccines at the rate demanded by the European Union according to their contracts. If it still owes the European Union vaccines, the European Union could block the export of them until that contract is fulfilled. I think it's worth saying as well to your viewers that the EU export controls will only apply to those countries which do have higher export rates than the European Union. It won't apply to any African countries, for example, because many of them are part of the COVAX scheme, which the EU is still supplying, and most other countries have lower vaccination rates than the European Union.
Well said, Henry, and thanks for, bringing up all the other issues surrounding this. But of course, I'm not wondering how much progress they can make on the issue today with all this back and forth going on in Brussels. What's the latest you're hearing, though, from the meetings? And talk to us about the Austrian Chancellor's suggestion that the EU must counter-steer massive imbalance of vaccine availability.
Yes, this is the crux of what the European Union is about, isn't it? Solidarity, 27 member states, and the EU's reasoning for doing a joint procurement in the first place a year ago was that they said that if there are differential rates of vaccine supplies across Europe in different countries, then that is going to create huge divisions. And so they plan to buy these vaccines and then share them out equitably according to population across the bloc. Now, Austria claims that the distribution mechanism just isn't working, and it's teamed up with 5 other Eastern European states and claiming that they're not getting enough vaccines versus other countries and that more should be given to them. Critics say that it's Austria's fault, in fact, for not trying to procure enough vaccines in the first place, and the rollout has been too slow there. So part of the problem here is the blame game and short-term political gains. Isn't this the case so often in the European Union, that many countries can either try to deflect the blame for national problems away and onto the European Union itself? And so the European Union has defended itself and said that, well, no, this is an equitable distribution of vaccines. So that's the one hurdle they've got to overcome first of all. And the second is whether to apply these vaccine export controls that we've been discussing. Not all countries are in favour of it. In particular, the Netherlands has been very much against it, and that is the base for one of the AstraZeneca factories that's making the vaccines, where they would be shipped from. Belgium as well has the biggest Pfizer-BioNTech supply factory as well. So there is a debate over whether these controls will happen as well. Tomorrow we will know much more about what the European Union intends to do. And it's a difficult calculation because relations with Britain are already very, very stretched over Brexit, over the political games that have been played around that by both sides over the past years. And so we will wait and see if the EU is prepared to escalate further to block any exports of vaccines to Britain.
Indeed, Henry. And I do remember the EU holding many meetings last year before it arrived at, developing vaccines and so on. Thanks again for breaking it down for us and keeping your ears close to the ground on the developments in Brussels. Thanks again, Henry.
Great to be with you.
Well, still in Britain, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, says that while he could see the benefits of COVID-19 certificates for international travel, moral complexities may mean that they cannot be used for entry to domestic hospitality venues. He suggested that some pubs in the UK might require customers to produce vaccine documents, an idea that he had deemed unlikely. Earlier today, he visited a nursery in West London where he said the government would say more on the subject in the future.
The issues that are raised by vaccination certification. What can you do? Now, in aviation, clearly there are lots of countries are thinking about using some sort of vaccine passport. And I think that there are 3 basic components. There's the vaccine, there's your immunity that you might have after you've had COVID, and then there's testing. So there are 3 things that could work together. No decisions have been taken at all. One thing I will make clear is none of this is obviously going to apply on April the 12th, when it will all be outdoors anyway. So whatever happens, April the 12th will be unaffected.
The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been in Brussels on a 3-day visit, not at the EU summit, but at the NATO summit also holding this week. Today, he emphasized that cooperation between allies is more important now than at any time in recent history, and that relations with NATO and the European Union will be crucial to overcoming the challenges.
I came here very much with one particular focus in mind, and that was to make clear the United States' determination to revitalize our alliances and partnerships, to re-engage strongly in them, and to work closely with our allies and partners. Needless to say, we are coming together. We're meeting at a time when we are facing very profound challenges, which include the devastating impact of this pandemic. But we're convinced that it is enduring relationships like the one between our countries and like the ones that exist through the European Union and through NATO. These relationships, these partnerships, give us the confidence that we can overcome any of these challenges if we do it together.
Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, has her ears close to the ground. Maria, how is Washington processing the renewal of ties between the United States and its European partners with Secretary Blinken's visit?
Thank you, Amarachi. Yes, the U.S. is definitely, I think, excited. Not only those who are in power politically, our federal government, our congressmen and those individuals, but also the everyday voter in America is looking forward to see how this coming together, talking about NATO again, all of these very important alliances to the United States, which it has been some time since those discussions. And we've seen this type of heavy push from the executive office in the U.S. and now the Biden administration stating that they are very much interested in realigning with those who have been allies. I think that many Americans were concerned that the U.S. might have been very vulnerable previously due to the lack of alliances with some of the long partnerships in Europe.
So Antony Blinken was at the NATO summit, and the EU summit is also holding in Brussels. The United States has been drawn into the conversation about vaccine production and exports, and it kind of sounds like countries are blaming the US and Britain for the imbalanced distribution. Has there been any response to this, and how would this impact President Joe Biden's plan to get every adult in the United States vaccinated by the month of May?
Well, you're exactly correct. Secretary Blinken has been in Europe kind of on this tour looking to ensure that the U.S. reestablishes many of its relations in Europe. And this directly has impacted some of the conversations around vaccine distribution. We know that the U.S. has secured close to 700 million vaccines, which should be available by July of 2021. And so due to that, it's obviously been said across the globe that the U.S. will now have more than enough vaccines available. And obviously, there's been conversations surrounding what happened several years ago with the swine flu, when those vaccines were available and the lack of providing them across the globe. And many of those vaccines were wasted in the U.S. and never utilized. And so that, I think, is really where the global community is looking to ensure that does not happen again. We know that in the U.S. there is still a shortage of available vaccines, even though there are many that have been secured for production, but there is a shortage of available vaccines for those Americans who are eligible to take the vaccine. There's also another issue, obviously, in the U.S., not only availability, but kind of faith and belief in the vaccine, which I believe the president, his administration, and local governments are looking to address that. But the president has offered up funding, and it's close to $2 billion thus far that has been provided for production of vaccines that will obviously go across the globe by the end of the year. And again, we've also obviously partnered with AstraZeneca to ensure that we're able to assist in Canada and in Mexico as well when those are provided, because AstraZeneca is not a vaccine that has yet been approved for use in the U.S. So there are some things that are being done to address it. But again, I think the president's first focus in his first 100 days was to ensure there was enough vaccines for Americans in the U.S.
Maria, thanks again for bringing us up to speed, and do stay safe.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's make a quick switch to a different matter now, and apologies are coming in from the Japanese owner of the giant cargo ship that has been blocking Egypt's Suez Canal since Tuesday and disrupting shipping over the coming days. His name is Shuei Kisen Kashai, and he says is trying to resolve the situation as soon as possible, but that dislodging the ship, the Ever Given, is proving difficult. A 400-meter long, 200,000-ton vessel became wedged across the canal in high winds and a dust storm. It's creating long tailbacks in the waterway, with more than 150 vessels currently waiting in the area to pass. It's 200 years of celebrations for Greece as it celebrates 200 years since its struggle for independence from the Ottoman Empire ended. It's marking this with a parade to mark a new beginning after years of financial crisis, but a bit more cautiously now because of the coronavirus pandemic. Today's ceremonies, however, at a time of renewed tension with Turkey, included a flypast by Greek, US and French fighter jets and a military parade, including performance dressed as Greek revolutionaries and Eve zones. Presidential guards in their white fustanella kilts and red pom-pom saroushia shoes. Leaders from around the world have been sending in their congratulations, including President Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria. In a statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs today, the government says it felicitates with the government and people of Greece on its 200th independence. The statement talks about Nigeria and Greece being partners in trade and tourism and hoping the celebration of the historic milestone will continue to promote peace, prosperity, and development between the countries. Other leaders such as U.S. President Joe Biden have also sent in their congratulations, with the president saying Greece and the U.S. will be closer than ever. Heir to the British throne, Prince Charles and his wife, the Duchess of Cornwall, Camilla, met with Greece's president and prime minister earlier today. And as we get closer to the end of the program, a digital artwork by humanoid robot Sofia has sold at an auction today for, wait for it, $688,888 in the form of a non-fungible token. That is a sign of a frenzy in the NFT art world. NFTs, a digital signature saved on blockchain ledgers that allows anyone to verify the ownership and authenticity of items, have become the latest investment craze, with one artwork selling this month for nearly $70 million. Sofia, who was unveiled in 2016, produced her art in collaboration with 31-year-old Italian digital artist Andrea Bonacetta, known for colorful portraits. Meanwhile, the identity of the buyer has not been revealed.
And we've been exploring Sofia's creativity on the side, but we really have been developing her as a platform and as a character more than as a work of fine art. So I'm really happy to revisit that world of pure creativity. The number of the auction, like the amount of money that her artwork has generated, is a great validation for this kind of creative project.
So Sofia can paint. What else will she do? Cook? Thanks for watching.